But in Wholesale Slaughter, I wanted to write an homage to Battletech. And I knew that Battletech style mech, 30, 40 feet tall, 30-ton, 50-ton mechs were not realistic because once you have the reactor power and the computing power and the materials to make that thing, then you would also have the weapons that could take it down easily.
Yeah, I mean, you could just put one of those lasers on a tank and slag it from 100 miles away.
Yeah, so
troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest. We enter the system on fire. Military sound and science fiction contest. Top stories every Wednesday. Military sound and fiction contest.
Welcome to the Military Science Fiction Podcast. So today we're talking about mechs. And Jeff immediately said, I don't write mechs. Jeff has raptors, people in mechs. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about.
They're not mechs, they're power armor.
They're power armor. What makes a mech? What is a mech? Is it a Gundam? Is it a Pacific Rim type giant robot? Is it power armor like Rick's series? Is it like Tranquility that Josh has been writing?
A mech is a anthropomorphic tank.
Anthropomorphic tank. There it is. Put it in the Oxford Dictionary.
That is a great definition.
Well, I mean, what is mech short for?
Well,
mecha. It's a Japanese word for mecha.
Well, I think, it comes from the whole giant robot idea from Japanese comics and whatnot. But
well, the first time I ever came into the knowledge of the word was in 1985. My friend busted out a box set of Battletech, and they called them mechs in there, but they never really.
The first mechs were from Japanese anime, like Neon Genesis event.
Right, but I mean,
Evangelion.
Is mecha short for mechanized?
I don't know that it's short for anything because Japanese have a way of making their own words out of English words.
Yeah, I mean, Battletech and then Robotech were the first. First interplay with it, or seeing it. The whole idea of transformable robots.
In disguise.
Yep. But I think that's part of the deal. Like you have this idea of what that is, like a transformer. And then as a writer trying to tell a story about this with humans, like how does this actually work? And one of the, like Rick, if you could expand a bit, because one of the things that's always stuck with me is when you said you have used them very much in the way that we use like Army aviation with rotary wing, where you're going to engage like a helicopter. They need maintenance like helicopters. They fall out of the sky like helicopters. That's a way of thinking about a mecha.
Let me first say that the word mecha originated in the 1980s from the Japanese word mechanizumu, which means mechanism. So there you go. That's its origin. I have used mechs in several different ways in different stories, most of which are not incredibly realistic, but they're very cool. And the rule of cool trumps everything. The realistic way to use mechs is the way I used them in Drop Trooper. And it wasn't the Earth side that did it. The enemy, the Tawnee, used mechs as mobile artillery pieces. So instead of having like a Crusader, I guess, is the big 155 mobile artillery piece on treads. Their artillery piece would be on legs, and they could walk it around in rough territory. But it was not designed to fight one-on-one. And when the Drop Trooper powered armor fight it, they're able to defeat it pretty easily because it can't defend very well against close-in combat. But that was a realistic way to do mechs. But I have also used mechs as the replacement for tanks and a replacement for attack helicopters in different situations. And I've tried to make them as realistic as is possible. It's not really possible to make them too realistic because mechs, when you come right down to it, are big targets.
And also the power source. I think that's one of the things you spent a bit of time on is you need a power source that will run them that is also not its own vulnerability.
You pretty much have to have a nuclear fusion reactor to run a good big size mech.
You also have to get around the tensile strength problem of giant walking robots, because steel doesn't get stronger just because you put more of it on there. You got to have new materials and all that, which is why I avoid it.
Well, I mean, there's going to be new materials. There's, you pretty much can't do anything we do in military science fiction without postulating that there is new, lighter, stronger materials for spaceships, for armor, for weapons, everything.
Mm-hmm.
When I did mine for Tranquility, I based them loosely around the game Titanfall, which I absolutely loved those two games.
Titanfall 2 has the best story of any of those kinds of games I've ever run into.
100%.
So good.
And I thought that so I knew what BattleTech was. I played I think the computer game, and I'm not sure if it was actually a BattleTech. Yeah, that's
a BattleTech game.
But I didn't like how big and clunky they were. They were kind of slow moving. At least the version that I played, and so the ones that I did,
all the old ones were like that.
Yeah, the ones that I kind of designed were smaller and more agile. Specifically for Tranquility, they were actually designed as construction exosuits, kind of mech suits. But there is a military variant. And in this particular story, I call them rigs, not mechs, but all the rigs were the construction ones, but the drivers were mostly ex-military. And so when they got to the planet and realized that there was a alien kind of menace that they had to fight, they weaponized all the rigs.
I see what you did there.
And I didn't even plan it. They basically put aftermarket kind of attachments onto the rigs and made them combat ready, combat capable. But they were not large. They weren't too terribly armored. It was just mostly what they could piece together from all the scrap and stuff that they had at the colony and the ship and stuff. And then later on in later books, they get actual combat mechs that are designed specifically for battle. But I liked the smaller version with limited weapon systems, limited power supplies. I liked that I could do almost Rick said
anthropomorphic.
They could pick up I made one guy make a big huge sword out of I don't know, some kind of helicopter blade or something, and he carried that around and swiped aliens with it. I like that kind of cool stuff.
Was she the full metal bitch?
Yeah. And
Rita Vertasky.
Well, much bigger, but
we do need to review that movie.
Yeah, I had fun designing those and creating those, but it was also fun because sometimes because they were not full combat equipment, they broke down or they had to get out of them and do other things, and that added additional layers to the story rather than just having massive armored behemoths walking around just destroying everything.
And I think that's
I always liked that about BattleTech, because it made the mechs there was a reason for them to exist other than just tanks, because one, they were 60 feet tall, so that gave them a field of vision and range that something low on the ground like a tank could not have. And two, It allowed them to just carry stupidly powerful weapons like the Gauss cannon or Gauss cannon that they used in the old BattleTech. I've heard it both ways. Cannon. It was it would shoot this giant, 3 foot wide, BB at something, and there was just no way a conventional tank could stop it. The only downside, of course, was with BattleTech is that they're 60 feet tall, and everybody from 100 miles away can shoot it and not miss. Which is why I don't do battle mechs in my world, because it's just it's not super realistic. They have to have a reason to have an advantage over anything else that would be cheaper and easier to make and maintain.
Would you like to know You'd like to know what Google says the pronunciation of Gauss is?
What does it say?
Yes.
Gauss.
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 Yeah, I said Gauss rifle because it's like you don't. I read it before I ever heard anybody say it.
Yeah.
So
It's
you
named
know,
after a guy.
I would say it's
Yeah, I
a
know.
name, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it's
I
Well, I
always
think
thought
what
it was-
Josh just
I
said
always thought
about
it was what Jeff said too. I always thought it was Gauss.
Gauss. Well, I think construction mechs are probably the most realistic place we would see them initially because
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Like as some, you
Right.
know, if you need some kind of augmented, you know, and you think about if you were going to write a battle in a like a futuristic factory, or that's where we're seeing robotics and humans, you know, coming together in a lot of more realistic ways. And then, you know, you think about the boss battle in so many games, it tends to be like you jump into a robot of some kind that has these massive um weapon systems that it's almost like Shadow of the Colossus, where you're either dismounted and fighting the mech, or you're in the mech fighting something bigger, but there's always a power imbalance there in some way. And so if you're going to make it interesting, like having a robot fighting a battleship or having, you know, a human fighting the robot, because robots versus robots, then you get into all these things that we're talking about that now you got to think about all this other stuff, like how do they maintain them, power them, you know, what materials they use, all that kind of thing.
I always liked the
Right.
slower pace of the older Mech Warrior games.
Mhm.
I felt like when they released Mech Warrior on the Xbox, they ruined it because it made sense to me that you wouldn't have these 100-ton robots running around like Muppets on crack. You know, they would be slow and ponderous. Though, do you guys remember an old 90s cartoon called Exo Squad?
Yeah.
Vaguely.
Oh man, it was 28 of the best episodes ever. If you get a chance to go back and watch it, it was exactly what Josh was talking about. It was these construction exosuits that had AIs in them that the wearers imprinted on, and then there was like a rebellion or something, and so these construction guys all became soldiers because they could use these suits. It's a great cartoon, and it ended the way you would expect it to end, with them finding out that the suits had, you know, kind of were alive on their own. And anyways, but it was really good, and it was like a cross between that suit that Ripley wore in Aliens and Titanfall. You know, it wasn't too big. It was more powered armor than it was Exo Squad, exosuit. It was more powered armor than it was BattleTech. And that to me always seemed like that's the way to go. Now that's not to say that it's not to say that I won't ever write a big Mech Warrior style book, but the way my brain works is I have a hard time letting go of science as we know it when I'm writing science fiction. So everything has to be at least plausible. And I even if the reader doesn't know it, even if I don't explain it in the book, I have to know if this is how this works. This is the material, that kind of thing.
You have to know. Well, I mean, I
have to know.
kind of did that in Wholesale Slaughter, which was my series that was all mechs. I had to come up with a good reason why everyone used mechs
Is
instead
Banff
of.
Wholesale Slaughter?
Pardon?
No.
Is your book Banff Wholesale
No,
Slaughter?
that's Broken Arrow Mercenary Force, which became Mech Force when Aethon bought the rights to it.
No relation to the other meaning of Banff, right? None.
Yes, it was a deliberate. That was Drew Avery's little joke and his idea for the actual mechs and that, so I can't take credit for it. But in Wholesale Slaughter, I wanted to write an homage to BattleTech, and I knew that BattleTech style mech, 30, 40 feet tall, 30-ton, 50-ton mechs were not realistic, because once you have the reactor power and the computing power and the materials to make that thing, then you would also have the weapons that could take it down easily.
Yeah, I mean, you could just put one of those lasers on a tank and slag it from 100 miles away.
Yeah, so I had to. Well, lasers wouldn't stop one of these things by itself. They're too tough. But anyway, I had to come up with a reason, and the reason I came up with was that they were the remnants of a older, more advanced civilization that had gone through a phase where mechs were briefly at a technological level where mechs could exist, and they didn't have the weapons that could take them down. That would have been the next step in just years, but their civilization fell. So all the weapons and the system of military that was left to these people, the remnants of the empire, was mechs. So that's what they know how to build. They don't have the capability to go beyond that point technologically yet, and it's been that way for like a couple hundred years. But by the end of the series, you can tell, well, this is coming. You know, they're starting to advance again. It won't last, but I just needed it to last for 6 books, and it did.
Nice.
It's funny. That's funny because trying to remember the name of the author. It's either Chris Kennedy or Mark
Wandry,
Wandry.
he
Right?
did the Four Horsemen.
Not the other Mark.
Which of other Mark?
Clues.
Yeah, Mark Wandry. Okay, I got it right this time. There's a Mark that I really like that I met in person that we're good friends.
Stallings.
Yes, Stallings, and I always confuse his last name with it. I didn't want to accidentally do that. Josh remembers Dragon Con last year.
That was hilarious.
Yeah, sorry, Mark. But that is amazingly similar to what they wrote in their book series about finding old mechs from an alien, species, and makes me wonder if they read your books.
I think their books came out first. Honestly, not sure. I didn't read them. I didn't read them before I wrote Wholesale Slaughter.
This could be an entire discussion we could have for a whole episode. In fact, we should make a note of that. I didn't read Dropshipper before I wrote the first 3 Against All Odds books. Like the first 3 Grimm's War books.
Yeah.
I just read obviously I wrote Arsenal, and I wrote Full Metal Superhero, and I wrote Superhero by Night. And then I had like a one-off science fiction novel I wrote called Intruder. And then I'm reading Rick's books, and I'm like, well, I can tell Rick and I are about the same age, having read the same books, having watched the same movies and TV shows, because our approach to technology in some cases was stupid similar. Like, I remember reaching out to you, Rick, and being like, so how'd you come up with this? Because I have the exact same thing in my book. And but I love Battle Mechs. I especially love Robotech. If I was ever going to write an homage to a Mech Warrior style series, I would write a Robotech style thing. It would have to all be alien technology, because I have to turn my brain off in order to write.
Well, and isn't that what they did in Robotech as well? Like the Robotech technology was the Zentradi. I think I'm mispronouncing that, but
no, that's right. You got it right.
Had the technology. The Zentradi were just soldiers.
You got to come up with some kind of like specific constraints on why it exists. Because human technology, I think we're right, as our current ways that we do things, like they just don't make a lot of sense in the way that we do warfare. But if you introduce some alien aspect and then we, co-opt that, now you can do it. Now you can play around with a lot of that stuff, because then you get the materials and the power sources and the ways of fighting that are different than what we do. And you can play with that in a lot of interesting ways. Like Transformers, I found it kind of went against everything I had grown up with Transformers. But in the movies, when they come up with the whole idea of basically their base technology transmutes everything, and that's why. Am I getting that right? I've only watched like 2 of the new Transformers movies.
I didn't. I've only watched the first one.
Yeah.
What were you saying, James, about their base technology?
Well, the new Transformers, don't they have some kind of? It's not the Allspark, but basically it takes any mechanical thing and can like turn it into something else, and that's part
that's the Allspark did that.
That's the Allspark. Okay.
Yeah, that was the dumb Allspark.
Yeah,
that did that. Now, not that there wasn't an Allspark in the cartoon, but that was their god or whatever. It was so dumb that they did that in the movie, because it made the Transformers nothing more than. Sorry, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, but that's where
even for the Transformers movie review,
they were at least trying to explain why that exists. So
the Allspark turned a soda machine into a mech.
Right. It's because somebody wanted to sell soda machines.
They were all evil. That was the stupid thing, is everything it created was evil. So
yeah, there are no good Transformers. There are no good Transformers.
Only good Transformer is a dead Transformer.
I'm trying to think if I've ever done like other than Tranquility, if I've ever done like an actual big military battle mech. I don't think I have yet. For weaponized,
We're a
I'm
family-friendly
doing
podcast.
a version of mechs, but it's for a sport. It's not for the military. I do well since we mentioned power armor. I do use power armor and weaponized. I've used it multiple times actually. I like that aspect of warfighting. That's not making it's not making the military guys super soldiers, but it's enhancing and in weaponized a lot of the armor is it's compact. It's almost like Halo armor, right? Like that's the
Well, that's something we need to talk about. There's 3 different types of mechanisms that would fit into our current topic, and one of them is obviously mecha, which mecha is something like the Japanese anime, the BattleTech Mechs, that kind of thing. And then you have powered armor or battle suits. Battle suits is like Starship Troopers, like Drop Trooper. And in BattleTech they have the elementals that are that's battle suits. Battle suit is something that you climb into, but it's not something you pilot like a mech. It's something that you operate. More like the exoskeleton that Ripley had in Aliens. And then you have powered exoskeletons, and that is what Jeff is talking about. That is like what we're developing currently, actually, for the military, is just something that allows you to carry more weight on your back and maybe carry thicker armor, but it's not something.
A mobile weapons platform.
It's not a mobile weapons platform. It's just something that enhances your natural strength, and it doesn't, mostly in fiction anyway, it doesn't require like a fusion reactor. It's something that you wear so you can carry around heavier armor or a heavier weapon or like more gear.
That's a good point, and I think the constraints of the pilot. That's one of the things about if you're going to have a human as part of this. They're inside the weapon system. Like now you got to deal. That gives you some good constraints because you don't want to turn the human into mush if something happens. Like they could still pilot it, or if it's augmenting them, you still got to deal with physics on their body and whatnot. As opposed to a remotely, if it's just a remote weapon system, then you can do all kinds of different things with it as far as, being mean.
Well, remote weapon systems, I don't include those when I talk about mechs, because basically if it's a remote weapon system, it's just a drone.
Yeah.
So with the Raptor suits I have in Grimm's War, they're powered exosuits basically. You climb into them, but you're not like,
you wear them.
Yeah, you wear them. They're 3 meters tall. Your legs go in their legs, your arms go in their arms.
That's the difference between a mecha and the others. Is mecha, you're like in the cockpit. You're piloting this thing that's a lot bigger than you, and the other ones you wear them, and your arms are basically where your limbs, your body's basically just wrapped inside a lot of armor.
And that's gotten them in the last book I wrote, like somebody gets their arm ripped off, and because the arm of the suit got ripped off and their arm was in it, and
it's inconvenient.
Yeah, that is.
Well, you're dealing with physics still works, right? So if you're dealing with the more the increased strength of the suit, you're still squishy, so that could be really bad.
I got to borrow one of the best lines from Halo Reach, though, which was after her weapon got destroyed. She's like, "Well, I've got more mass than you," and because the suits are like 3 tons compared to the powered armor suit that they were fighting, which was more like a Halo style, Master Chief power suit. So and if we want to talk about just straight up mecha, where you're like piloting it, you're in the cockpit, I love that stuff. I just don't write it. I
love it, and I write it.
But I do one day hope to write. BattleTech is on my list of IPs I'd love to write for. BattleTech, Shadowrun, guys, best-selling author here. I love Shadowrun.
Call me up.
Robotech. I've reached out to the daughter of what's his name, the guy who owned Robotech. he got into a decades-long rights battle with Japan over the rights to Robotech, because one of the companies that
Harmony Gold.
Harmony Gold, yeah, one of the companies that they bought the rights from back in the early 80s didn't necessarily have the rights to sell it. And that's why there hasn't been any new Robotech stuff in years, because they were in a rights battle. Well, Harmony Gold got the rights that all the rights they needed to do Robotech, and the guy died. And so now
Frank Agrama.
yeah, now his daughter has all of it, but she's done nothing with it. And
Well,
so
Sony has the rights to release a film in the Robotech franchise. They've just never used it.
They've been trying for years, but that's when they ran into the rights problem with Japan, because they didn't have the rights to some of the mecha. Just like BattleTech didn't have the rights to a lot of the mecha that they used.
Was it the Forbidden Five, was it called?
Yeah. And so I actually reached out to her on Facebook and said, hey, told her who I am. I'd love to write Robotech books if they're interested, but obviously never got anything back from her.
And you could combine like K-pop, whatever fandom with.
You're lucky she didn't set loose the ninjas to come to your house.
Because Robotech was always this weird mix of like singing, and like when I was a kid, I'd watch that and be like, what are they doing? Why do they have a singing?
I both hated and loved Robotech as a kid. So I loved the war and the suits and everything.
Skull Squadron.
And I hated the interpersonal relationships that they insisted on squeezing into it.
Exactly.
It was also a little weird because when Rick meets Minmay is 15 years old.
Well, aren't they all like 16?
Well, Rick is only like 19 at the time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, there's a large difference between 19 and 15.
Not to the 1980s Japanese.
The whole thing, if you guys don't know, the whole thing about Robotech was it was 3 different series
that they
spliced up and put together to make one.
One of them was Southern Cross or something like that.
That's the sequel series. They actually did that. No, I mean like Robotech itself. Like the first Robotech Macross Saga was 3 different animes that were put together to make one.
Right.
And then they did the same thing for the Southern Cross, the same thing for Robotech Masters. The Invid movies are their own like created from scratch thing. But yeah, no, he died the year they got the rights back, which was really sad, of COVID, because everybody who died that year died of COVID. And but now his daughter has it, and I have no problem.
His daughter has COVID?
Huh? No, his daughter has Robotech, silly. And I have no problem reaching out to people. Like I've emailed the Shadowrun people multiple times, and I've emailed the BattleTech people, and I've emailed Marvel, and I've emailed a whole bunch of other people. Just IPs that I have a list of IPs that I would love to write with. And so far,
change your name to IP Freely.
Failure every single time. And everybody always tells me at the cons, like, oh, you don't want to write for them, you won't make any money. I'm like, who said anything about making money? I make money already. I want to have my name, associated with this IP.
Yeah, Shadowrun. I knew someone else that was very close to doing a Shadowrun book, and then they just didn't publish anything. Like, have they even? Well, that's another topic. But Josh? One thing I wanted to ask about is like how you might be doing different things differently when it's sports. Like, do they have different weapons, or are they like smashing into each other? Like, what different things have you been thinking about for that?
It's in my mind, it's kind of like so I call it war ball, but it's like football with extra violence, and they're not the drivers are not actually in the suits. They're like off the field in like if you watch what's that thing it used to be on History or Sci-Fi Channel where they BattleBots or something where they were off the arena floor and driving them off the arena floor. I want to have something like that where they're in some kind of like gyro system where they're controlling the robot remotely. And if like say the robot gets his arm cut off, that would be disabled on the remote control device, and it would you could have players get removed from the game. You could have all of this. I haven't really fully visualized it all out because I'm not at that point in the book yet, but I want to have in my mind, I see like the stuff in Tron. Do you remember Tron? Not the first one, but
Tron
the
Legacy.
second
Legacy?
one where the
Yeah.
Legacy, where the light cycle matches was happening on like different levels, and they were like going through different levels, kind of like that, where it's almost like a 3-dimensional game arena where there's multiple platforms, multiple levels. And they can move between them freely, but there's also obstacles and like weapons positioned strategically around the arena, where they don't start out with any weapons, but they can get some as the game kind of progresses and they unlock or hit different milestones in the game or whatever. But that the robots would actually get destroyed, right? Like they in the BattleBot TV show, those robots get destroyed during the course of the match, and you've got to repair them and all that kind of thing. But I thought that would be kind of fun to do. Kind of it's not. I mean, I'm sure people have done that kind of thing before, but
I had an idea. I never did write it. It was from my Glory Boy novel. When the guy was in the academy, I was going to have him on the sports team, but I just didn't get around to it. It didn't feel, it felt like it would have just been filler. But I had designed the whole sport and everything. It was called Cyberball, which is why I offered that name. I never use it.
Nice.
But
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, well, maybe in the future, to avoid the injuries they get from football, they wear powered armor. And I had them in 0G, like in orbit, and they're in a torus. And you have to go, and they're powered by like little air jets, and they have to go around this torus, and they have defensive and offensive teams, and it's kind of like rollerball in powered armor in space. You have to get the ball into a magnetic goal, and people slam into you, and it's really violent, but nobody really gets hurt.
Actually, I didn't even know that I was going to create the sport and do that with the mechs until I needed a kind of a set piece for the main characters to meet at and do like kind of a clandestine spy meeting or whatever. And I've been, kind of in different scenes, like kind of foreshadowing that event where, like a war ball tournament is going on, but they're watching it on like TV or something at a bar or something like that. And then when I needed them to meet somewhere, instead of doing it at like some shady bar or like a abandoned factory, something, I was like, why don't they just meet in a big arena? And so I can show the game, like I can have the narrative kind of coincide with them watching the game, and I can show it, but it's not just like a side thing where you're just watching the game for no reason and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything else that's going on, just because it was a cool idea. But I felt like having that meeting happen in the arena, I could set it up, I could show different segments of the game and kind of progress through the game as they're doing the other stuff that's specifically plot related. And I was, it's just kind of one of those, rule of cool things where you have an idea and try to work it in. At some point, I would like to do some kind of edition where they're in maybe some kind of battle mech, but more in this particular series, it's probably just going to be more battle armor related. And I have kind of 3 variants of like humanity in this book, where there's just the natural human beings that I call natties, and then the cybernetically augmented, which is just cybers, and then gene modification, which I call splicers. And so like the splicers are like big roided out, like they've got massive muscles and dense bone and all of that. And then obviously the cybers are just like your normal.
You got the natty, and then you got the natty light.
Yeah,
Right.
natty light, right?
You know,
I
was just
think
thinking
that,
like a piece of that would be really cool is like the pit crew, because it almost sounds like it's like a version of Indy 500, and then as
that
things
would be
happen,
cool too.
Like it doesn't sound like that's part of this story necessarily, but to see it from the pit crew's perspective, where they're supporting the pilot and they got to
Right.
pull the mech in, repair it, get it back out, like that would be cool.
Yeah, I don't know how I would do that with the arena that I'm envisioning, because there wouldn't be any safe way for the repair crew to get in there. Once you're in, man.
Yeah.
But
It makes me
There's,
think.
Battletech
It makes me
had a
think I'd love to
series
see
called-
something like Formula One racing, except remotely piloted cars, just to see what it would look like.
That would be
Yeah.
cool.
There's so many
there's
crashes.
RC racing. There's also RC plane racing, which is probably more relevant because the planes are way more expensive than the cars. Battletech had a series called Solaris 7. There was a planet where people did, Mech Warrior style combat on a planet for spectator sports. You might look into that too.
Oh,
Yeah, but
okay.
I don't mean
cool,
like
cool.
RC racing with cars that are like this big, I mean full-size
Full
F1
size.
cars. All the same specs, except piloted by somebody like with a joystick.
Kind of like drone, like first person view drone racing, but with actual fighter planes. That would be cool.
Well, see,
Yeah.
with the racing, you lose the constraint of the driver, but you still got to deal with the track. So that would be cool because they could go a lot
Yeah.
faster.
And
And
if you wreck it, you're out.
right,
Right.
that'd be cool.
I actually wanted to get into drone racing a couple of years back, but I couldn't convince the wife that was a necessary expense that I needed for research purposes.
Well, like, have you ever watched? I mean, I've watched videos. I've wanted to. It's a kind of thing that if I had $1,000, like the first person drone racing, is what you're talking about?
Oh yeah,
Gosh,
it's
yeah.
super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like disorienting to, I don't know, be first person flying. There are people there's a football field near my house where I've hung out with a guy that was doing it, and it just seems wild. Like that would be a lot of fun, but you're still dealing with the constraint of the person not getting sick while they're doing it.
For sure.
So
I also, I don't know how you guys feel about this. I know Jeff is more constrained in his current stuff with like actual science and that kind of stuff. Some of the powered armor that I've created for weaponized is like static armor pieces where they put it on, not necessarily step into it, but put it on, kind of like I said, Halo armor, where it just fits around the person.
The last suit you're ever gonna wear.
Yeah, but this is the alt version of that is like a liquid nanite infused like kind of carbon alloy that is stored in like
there's a lot of science behind that.
Yeah. Well,
But
it's like
that's
it's so
actually
it's
a
kept
thing.
it's kept in a bladder on this guy's hips because he's like half cybernetic, like his legs are all cybernetic. He's got a whole bunch of internal peripherals and stuff, and this bladder holds this armor. I think it's nanite composite thermo ceramic armor or something like that is what I called it in the book. But he can activate it with his they've all got what I call i3
should give it
chips.
like a nice acronym to call it.
There is. I just don't remember what it is. It's in my document somewhere. I know I call it something cool. I just can't remember what I called it. But he can activate it with a thought, and then it flows over his body, and then solidifies, and then he's got like an augmented reality visual display that's on.
But
that's
a different type of armor that we didn't mention yet, which I don't know if it qualifies for this or not. But there is something. From GURPS, I don't know if you remember GURPS Ultratech back in the day had something
universal
called
role-playing system.
Yes.
Oh,
had something called a cyber suit. And what it is basically, it's a skin tight suit that's made out of nanites, and it can selectively harden parts of it to make you stronger. It can make itself into an exoskeleton. It can also harden if it senses, something like a punch or a bullet or something like that coming at it. It can harden selectively parts of the suit. Now, the only thing that is kind of hand-wavy out there is the power source for this was never really made clear, because it would have to be something very, very small, like you could wear in a belt. But that's another type of powered armor.
They have some kind of body armor now that is kind of like quasi liquid based, where it solidifies if a bullet hits it.
Right.
And it doesn't require any power. It's just
this isn't just something that does that. This also solidifies like at your joints if you're trying to lift something to make you stronger.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of makes it powered armor in this discussion.
Now, there's something we've never seen is some kind of organic mecha, or like, I wonder how you could do it with plants, like something that is
I used that cybersuit idea. And in one of my books I made it into a a biological kind of, I don't know if I say bacteria, some kind of growth that is infused with like thermoplastic and can move around the armor. And I called it what did I call it? I can't remember, but it was that idea. It was a biological armor that you would wear. And they also used it. You could put it if it was really expensive and time consuming and really invasive surgery, but you could put it under your skin.
Mm. Well, that would, the joke about like our brains are just roaming around in meat mechs. Like if
Yeah.
there was some sort of mecha that was actually based on muscle, like gorilla muscle, that was then worn as
Biomer. That's what I
biomer.
called it,
Yeah,
biomer.
that's cool. That's a cool idea. Yeah,
I have
if
some
anybody's,
stuff in weaponized that's called bio-nanodermis, and
uh-huh.
it's like just a thin layer that you can put on.
Bio-nanodermis.
Yeah. So it's like almost everything in weaponized has some kind of nanite, kind of enhancement. Like instead of having regular tattoos, they have nantus because they're nanite infused tattoos, so they can like
Nantus.
they can shift around and they can change
Oh yeah,
color
yeah.
and like yeah.
I have
So
those too. I think I call them something like active tattoos.
yeah.
We have a nanite lab on my campus, and I toured it once, and they joked that like, oh yeah, we don't really know if they've escaped the lab because they get through everything. I'm like, oh, that's great, thanks.
Oh, that's
My
good.
favorite,
That's
my
good.
favorite one that I gave somebody in a book was the guy's head was bald, like depilated permanently, and he had like a wolf chasing a deer on this animated active tattoo in his head, and it would catch the deer and rip it apart in a spray of blood over and over and over again.
Nice.
Well, it's the kind of thing where we haven't necessarily seen, or at least I guess I haven't researched it, but to see that technology commercialized, and maybe tattoos are what will bring nanites to the forefront while we're.
It's the easiest thing to do. Eventually, that's probably going to happen first.
Probably not though, because about 5 years ago, they came out with basically a vanishing ink tattoo ink, and you could put it on, and then if you got tired of it, you could spray a chemical on it, and it would vanish.
Uh-huh.
It would break down, and it would be gone. Otherwise, it was permanent. All the tattoo artists refused to use it because they want their art to be permanent.
Well, somebody will use it if there's enough money in it. Somebody will learn how to do it.
There was a lot of money in this because vanishing tattoos. You get tired of your tattoo, you spray it, you get another tattoo. But the artists, all of them, like lockstep, refuse to use it. And so
that'd be kind of interesting because when I get tattoos, I'm like, I want to have this on. I guess if you get like your spouse's name or something and you get divorced and you've got to get rid of it. But,
or you get to 70 and you look ridiculous with these tattoos covered in
by the time I'm 70, I don't care. I mean, I'm 40 something now and I don't care now. So
I never wanted a tattoo. I felt like I don't like needles. I don't like getting shots. I don't want somebody sticking ink under my skin. I just don't feel like it'd be a pleasant thing to do.
So maybe there's some stories people could tell, like not giant robots, but tiny robots, and like fighting in nanites. Like everybody talks about, quantum.
But that would not be a mecha.
I know. I can't think of his name.
It'd be a tiny mecha.
Really wish I could.
Mecha are piloted.
This is true. We decided that.
It would be a drone.
there is when you said the stuff got out of the lab, the nanites or whatever, they said we don't know. It reminds me of that Michael Crichton book, Prey, because that was all like nanite based, and there was some kind of cloud.
It's the old gray. It's the old gray goo nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, we should get back to. I think we should talk a little bit about how to make the most realistic mecha you can make, since we've agreed with Jeff that they're not really incredibly realistic as it is. How do you make the most realistic one you can make?
I always approach things in the military from two perspectives. What is its purpose, and what is the cheapest it can be made?
Yeah.
Because that's every vehicle in the military, right? Military grade.
And piloting. Yeah.
I love the military grade thing.
Yeah.
If it's too difficult to train someone to run it, then
well, it's like I met a DARPA contractor at Dragon last year, and she was talking about this. Sorry, and she's talking about this sniper rifle that they made that was a grenade launcher. 2,000 meters precision grenade launcher. The Marines loved it. And so she's like, so should we greenlight this? And they said, oh, hell no. It has no purpose and it's too heavy, you know, but they loved shooting it at the range. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You know, headshots.
If you had a powered exoskeleton to carry it.
Yeah,
There you go. So yeah, I mean, so you have to look at it like, what is its purpose that is fulfilling?
See, that's the thing that in wholesale slaughter, I actually have them talking. Why don't we have something like, we have fusion reactors that'll fit in mechs. Why don't we just make a tank with a fusion reactor? And their philosophy was, yeah, a tank with a fusion reactor is pretty powerful, but it's also limited to, it's going to be big. You know, the fusion reactor is not incredibly small. It's going to be big, and it's going to be limited to flat lands, you know, that you can drive a tank over.
Right.
Whereas if you have a mech, it has jump jets, a lot of them do anyway. And if you get to like a place where you couldn't drive over it, you can jump over it. You can
that's what I
climb
was just
over it.
thinking.
If you have a constraint on air superiority, then mechs become a lot more realistic, because now,
Yes.
you know, if we're trying to get up and down ridges and, you know, rugged terrain where a tank can't move, but, you know, we currently have air, you know, if you've got air support, you don't need that. But if you don't have it, then now a mech is a lot more realistic. And I guess, yeah, going back to what Rick was saying, like we need materials, we need a power source, we need a task and purpose, and then you can do a lot of fun stuff with, like Jeff was saying, that the material support of why we even made this thing. Like maybe you've got an evil corporation that just really wants to make mechs because they're also in the construction business. So why don't we just repurpose these and sell them to the government?
For
You
sure.
know, like a Lee Iacocca thing. And now all of a sudden we got mechs we need to use. So I don't know. It
I
makes me
wrote a
think about people
series,
driving Dodges all the time in the 80s. Like, why are we driving these garbage Dodge trucks? Because we got them. So
one of the first science fiction stories I ever wrote in my life, and I was like, I don't know, 15 or 16 when I wrote it. I still got like the handwritten notebook somewhere in my office. But it was that I had versions of like battle mechs and then fighters or whatever, but all the battle mechs had like several different classes and they were all used for different things. And so you had like big bulky, like basically like an M1 Abrams type mech that was slower than the whatever the Bradley variant of that mech was. And so you could have some advanced reconnaissance mechs that went out really quickly, and then you had the heavy armor that would come in and clean up after. And I would like, if I ever did it, I would do something like that where you don't have a like a one size fits all thing.
Right.
You would have multiple different types of mechs to do the different tasks, just because, you know, you walk in with a big robo mech or whatever it is, and you're just laying waste to a town. Is that like accomplishing your objective, or are you just blowing stuff up just to blow stuff up? You know what I mean?
are you Russian? But yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
I
blowing
think-
stuff up just to blow stuff up has its own benefits.
True.
Right. But I
Very
think if you're
true.
committed to the idea of mechs, like this is a world where these were developed instead of tanks for whatever reasons. I think if you're going to do things, just have that reason, you know, and it doesn't have to be deep. But if you take away air power, now mechs are a lot more, you know, believable. Or C, like we haven't talked about C, like C mecha would be really interesting, or zero G. I don't know. There's a lot
I
of
like
I
the
mean,
idea of
if you had a mech with jump jets, you could get around in zero G fine without otherwise modifying it.
I like the just the added mobility that they give versus tanks. And specifically, I like the idea of just like when you talk about deployment onto a battlefield. If you're deploying tanks, obviously you're taking them in like a C5 or Galaxy or something. It's, you got to have a big runway. You've got to unload them. You got to do all that stuff. If it's like a quick deployment type thing, I've done. I think that I did it in Tranquility, but the mechs are like loaded into racks on a drop ship, and then that drop ship would just fly down low, and then they could detach and either fall, kind of like Titanfall, where they're falling from the sky, but they've got like scram jets or jump jets on their armor, and they would slow their descent, and so they wouldn't crash land. But even though they do the little the superhero landing where they land on
Right.
their knee and their arms out, and they're like, "Ka-cha!" But I like seeing that visual is cool to me. So I would like I like doing stuff like that just for the visuals, but also because it explains how are you going to get really heavy mechanized armor into an area where you haven't secured yet. You don't have an airfield. You don't have anything like that. You need a quick deployment force. That would be something that it could be
Drop
utilized
ships.
for.
Yeah.
I did a thing in Know Thy Enemy where they deployed the Raptors from orbit, and they did it by essentially adding like a booster pack to them,
Right.
to slow them as they went in.
Yeah.
And then they ejected it. It was disposable. They ejected it when they got to the ground.
You know, in a
Do you
lower
guys
gravity
remember,
situation too.
I used it for weaponized in the very beginning chapters when they still are doing military stuff and they're not out of the military yet. They used like drop pods where there was like 4 or 5 in a pod, and as they come down, that's how they get through the atmosphere and all that. And then when they get closer, then they deploy off, and they've got smaller kind of thrusters and stuff that will slow them as they get down to the ground. But do you guys remember that movie? It was Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, and it was a
I saw
really
it
fun
once.
movie.
I saw it once. It had the whole
Yeah.
I hated
uncanny
the
valley,
ending.
had the whole
Yeah.
uncanny valley thing going for it.
Mhm.
I mean, it wasn't really Final Fantasy, right? Like it had the names of like Sid was in there, and it was.
There is
you know,
no real Final Fantasy. They're all different. They're unconnected. Their stories are meaningless. So it's not like there was
that is true.
something to
But
follow.
they had when they
Focus.
jumped into the city. When they jumped into the city, and
You
they're
got some feelings
they're-
about this, Jeff.
Yeah, he did. They're coming down through the air, and they
Yeah.
flip over, and they shoot that like jelly pad down to the
Yeah,
ground,
that was
and
cool.
it flies up, and then they land in the jelly pad and step out. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, actually. I like that.
All my mechs and battle suits have the same. They all come down in drop ships. They a big ship, depending on how big the mechs are, a very big ship, comes down probably between 1,000 and 400 meters from the ground, and drops them out. And the ones that have jump jets, use the jets to get to the ground. The ones that don't, they have these one-time use frames with retro rockets on them that get them to the ground and then break off.
Oh, that's cool.
Mhm. It always struck me as like that's a one-way trip, buddy. If you don't make it, you got to protect that ship.
You got
For
to
sure.
you've got to either conquer a landing zone for them to come back and pick you up, or you're going to leave your mech behind.
Right. Right. So this has been, I think, if any takeaway here is that there's a lot of different stuff to think about with mechs, but
And Jeff's kids are very loud.
and Jeff's kids
Yeah.
are great. Rule of cool seems to be the key takeaway is like how can you
I
make
mean,
it
if
as
you're
cool as
gonna
possible?
go ham, go ham.
Right.
Don't worry about the other stuff.
All you got to say is you got a fusion reactor, and
You gotta have power source, and you have to have the materials.
and you got some
You have a
sort of
reason for it existing.
magic material that makes it all worth hacking.
And then make it worth it because people want to see. I want to see some big robot fights.
Yeah.
If you're doing
Yeah.
it, like
Well,
bring it.
then you should watch a movie. But we're writing books, so
I would say the only thing to be wary of with mechs, and it's why I usually am hesitant to write them, is if you're going to write them, make sure they have some legitimate faults or some legitimate weaknesses that
Yeah.
either they have to overcome in the battle or that cause
Heat was a brilliant thing in BattleTech. Heat was brilliant.
well, yeah, I mean that's a great plot device because you've got to combat that somehow, right?
For
But
me,
just don't make them like
in my
overpowered,
books. The biggest weakness was you can't hide them.
Mhm.
yeah, true.
They're huge,
True.
and on thermal, they just stand out like a torch.
Right.
Mhm.
And the Tani are also similar. They've got a similar level of technology. So yeah, that's a real, like, they're going to see you. So what are you going to do about
Yeah.
it? So, all right. Well, this has been great. Let us know what you enjoy about mechs, or maybe something we didn't talk about in the Discord channel. So come hang
If
out.
one of the ideas we popped up with about other episodes, if you like one of those, let us know.
Yeah. And thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time. All right. Later.
See you.
Lone out troopers on a hit and jump day. Military silence.